Well, hey folks, welcome back to the shop. Got your hair cut. Looks good on you. This is part 2 of rebuilding the top end of this 94 Evolution motor. Hey, quick fun fact for you. You know, Harley had the famous knucklehead, then they came out with the pan head, my personal favorite. Then after that, they had the shovel head, and then they went with this Evolution motor, and it's often called a blockhead. So if you ever hear anybody talking about a blockhead motor, this is the one we're rebuilding. So this is part 2 of the first video, and check it out in our playlist if you hadn't. We tore it down, and now we're going to start building it back up. So welcome back to Butler Customs Motorcycle Shop. Now, last time we were together, we took the heads and the jugs off, but we didn't take the lifters off. So I went ahead and did that. Here is the rear lifter, and they are marked rear and front, so you can't get them mixed up. And I like to leave my lifters in the correct positions that they were in. Now, when you go to pull these out, you're going to have an issue because these are not locked in. They will fall on you. If you got pretty good oil pressure, they might stay in like that and you can raise them up, but if you watch, they'll fall out. So a good trick to do, the manual will tell you to take a piece of wire and curve it, but I have found that if you'll take a large paper clip like this, or binder clip, I'm not sure what they're called. Take out this metal piece here, go to your grinder or cutoff wheel and sharpen this flat and to a point. And then what you can do is actually compress it together and get in. Oop. Try this again. So what you can do is compress this together, get in. Well, come on. Oh, come on. I can't even see what I'm doing. Are you kidding me? Kind of widen this pin out. And then you'll seat it down in there just so it catches the lip of both of your lifters. And it's just enough pressure that it'll actually hold these lifters together. All right, so putting these back together, of course, you're going to clean this surface off, which is super easy to do. And then as far as you're getting the gasket off of this, that usually come off easy. A little razor blade, they're kind of get brittle and hard and they'll snap off. Keep these positioned where you want them, where they came out. Now you'll notice if you take one out, there is an oiler hole actually in the lifter, only on one side. It does not matter, according to the Harley's manual, which orientation you have this in. If the oil hole is on the outside or if it's here like this on the inside. This one's on the inside, and I believe this one was, yeah, on the inside as well. The manual says it doesn't matter where you put these. It's going to get the oil through how it's supposed to anyway. I like to leave them facing inside. I just always have, and these were that way, so I'm just going to leave it. I like to leave them the way that they were, that I took them out, because of the position that these are rolling on the cam. And I certainly don't want to swap these and get them out of orientation because this has been rolling on that cam lobe, and this one's been rolling on a different cam lobe. And so they've kind of mated real well and rolled together. These are fine. Test all of these, check them out for wobble and play. I've already done that, they're all fine. Also blow you some air in these oil holes, just in case you got some gasket material in there, or get a pick them out. And then before you set the lifters on there and the gasket on there, you want to oil your cams really well. So we'll take our little oil can, we will get right on top of the cam itself. And be liberal with it. Let it run all down that cam. And then you will want to oil your lifters as well. We'll roll that around, roll this other one around. All right, we're ready for our gasket to go on. Make sure you get the gasket oriented where that oil hole is clear. Make sure that you've cleaned out your threads as well. And then we're going to go ahead and set our lifters with the housing and all right down in there. Now we've got our tool here, so it's going to kind of help lock it in place and keep the tension on it. And we're just going to set it right down inside. Make sure your oil hose lined up with this one up here. That's how you know you've got it oriented correctly. We're going to set it right on there. Now there's no torque spec for these bolts, but the customer or somebody previously has already replaced these with some Allen head bolts that kind of set down in this hole. And because of that, there's no need for an alignment tool, because once these are seated, it aligns this where it should be and then aligns the cam or the lifters on the cam. And so you just want to be careful. And so if you'll see here, this lifter will adjust so that this bolt goes down into the recess. When it does that, it kind of centers up the lifter on the cam lobe to where it needs to be. Because these could get off a little bit while you're installing them, I'm just going to just barely let them set until I get all four in. I did put some thread lock on, some blue thread lock on these bolts, even though the manual doesn't say, but because there's no torque spec, I just don't want these, vibrating off or backing out. Now the manual does say just snug them up. They're not big bolts. You sure don't want to strip this out. There is no gasket sealer that goes on these gaskets. And I do use the good James gaskets just because I've got a lot of experience with them, never had an issue with them. Now I like the cosmetics or cosmetics as well, but I just prefer the James. I like how their head gaskets are designed with the metal and the rubber seal. I really like those. Now that those are in place, we can take our little retainer out. And then inside these lifters, you'll have a washer, metal washer on the bottom, and then an O-ring on the top. So might be a good idea for you to take these out while you're installing, because I just had one fall out. And then of course we're going to replace these O-rings with new ones. Now we can look in here in the front and rotate our wheel with it in gear and see actually how our lifters are lining up on our cams. But if these are seated in here, we've done our job right, and they are. So I'm just going to do a visual inspection in here. Now when you set the front one on, you're not going to be able to see without the case off here, the case cover here, you're not going to be able to see what's going on inside. So if you've got a little alignment tool, by all means use it. They're handy to have. And also when you're rotating this wheel to see how these line up, remember your pistons, if they're still in, or your piston rods, that they're going to move as well. So if you got them covered up, beware of them sliding up and down. And if you got rubber hoses on there, still beware they can get caught in that and get cattywampus on you. So now we can get a better view of how those lifters set on those cam lobes. And I know we're looking at it crooked, but I've looked at it dead on, and we are good and straight and exactly where we need it to be. So we'll go ahead and put the front one on as well. All right, we'll get our locking tool in there. So that's good. Always check it, make sure it's holding them. If it drops down in there, it's not a pain to get out. See how that clipped out there? They're not a pain to get out, but you just kind of have to start the process all over again. Now make sure that they are indeed seated all the way up. And then when you lock them in, you'll see that they stay up there. So let's get our gasket on here. Okay. And we'll make sure our oil hole here lines up there. And then we'll go ahead and slowly and carefully set this in. I've already put thread locker on these. You always want to get a couple of them started so you know you're centered. So we're going to go down and let that center itself in that recess. It's very important. And don't just do one, because you can have one in and it still be kind of crooked. So when you go to set the other one in, that's when it'll pull everything and line everything up the way it should be. And these are so much easier to do with the jugs off, I'll tell you. So that's the time to do them. And the kit comes with the gaskets and your new O-rings for your push rod tubes. So it's a good time to do it, and you can inspect your lifters and your cam as well. Of course, this is an Evolution, it's a single cam. And then the big twins, the twin word comes from twin cam. All right, now we can take our clip out, and I just watched the lifter go where it needs to go, and it's seated down there very well. So a real good handy tool to keep in your tool chest, and if it doesn't keep tension on it good, just kind of pull it out a little bit, and that'll keep real good tension. And the newer manuals, they have making this as an actual tool in the Harley manual. Kind of weird, but it works. All right, now we'll move on to setting our jugs on. We've already put our new rings in. Now before we do all that, I want to let you know, you'll see might not be a nice chrome Allen head like this. Might just be a nut that you'll see here. And what you want to do, probably should have done while we had the lifter covers off, but you're going to unscrew this, and what you're going to find under there is a spring and an oil screen. So it's a good time while you're here, check your gasket, take that out. You can take the little clip tool that you made and you can pull this spring out, and inside that spring should come out an oil screen. There. So take this out, blow it out with some carb cleaner, throw some air through it, but look at all the junk that screen catches. Quite a bit of trash. And I don't know if you can see it up in there, but it's pretty bad. So what we'll do is spray this out, clean this out, look down and inspect inside there, and then put this back in and put the spring and the cap back on. Now a handy tool that I like to use to clean out holes like this, and especially like your jugs, cleaning out the holes that these studs are going to set down in. Get out your rifle cleaning kit, put some cleaners on there, some little rags on there, and you can go down in there in that hole and actually clean out all that debris that's down in there. A lot of junk down in there. Now we can put our screen back in. That goes upside down, but I like to take the spring or the screen. I like to take the screen, put it in the screen. Take the spring, put it in the screen. Now take the screen, put it in the spring. Then this flat part sets down. Drop that in there. Make sure your gasket is good and oiled and not tore up. You can reuse these if they look fine. And then I go ahead and put my tool on there, because you've got to kind of push a little pressure down as you thread just to get it started. So if you're having oil issues, check your oil screen here. If it's clogged, none of that's getting the oil that it needs from your pump. Of course, this is an external oil pump. The twin cams have them internal now. I kind of like the external ones. They're easy to get to, take off, repair, fix, and put back on. The new ones the twin cams are inside this case, so they can be a big job to get to and replace. But these come in really handy, especially to clean the jug holes out and, you know, other things that are hard to reach. Okay, so now we're ready to go placing our jug on. A couple things to note. Put your James gasket down where the oil passage is not plugged. Your dowel pin is showing, and make sure the gasket sets flat on the case. And these little bitty, I guess what you'd say metal washers that I actually attach to the studs are not, the gasket isn't setting up on that. So everything is setting well. We lubed up the piston and the rings and the compressor, and I compress it. Now when you compress these, you want to just barely get the top of the top ring compressed. That leaves a little bit of lip here so that you can set your jug on and it actually catches, and then as you tap it down, it will indeed slide and down where it should be. Now your jug, we've honed it out. We have cleaned the gasket material off the bottom and top, which is a bare. And now we're ready to go on, and we oiled it. We cleaned it out good. These only go on one way, so you can't really get the rear and the front mixed up. The dowel pins are in different orientations and positions. So now we can just go up on here. I can grab this. This can set now right on here. And then what I'm going to do is just let a little bit of pressure off my tool. Now I just want to lightly tap it down. Of course, pay attention to your front as well. Want to make sure our gasket's seated down. And we're going to go right down carefully. There. Now, nice and seated. You'll have a little bit of oil come out up here, and that's a good sign. Shows that your rings are indeed working. Checking around the base, everything looks good and seated down properly, and man, those James gaskets are really nice. Now, of course, we did take our rifle cleaning tool and cleaned out the bores of all of these jugs and the oil passages, and also we cleaned up the threads. So we put the front one on, same as the rear. Some things to note when you're cleaning up the gaskets on these cylinder heads. The top, or on these jugs, the top's not going to be that bad. You can use a razor blade or flat edge and get most of that off. If you see a little like stains from the old gasket, as long as it's smooth, you're fine. So don't try to dig and get everything shiny if it's not needed. Now on the base gaskets, they're going to be a bare no matter how you attack it or how you do it. Take your time. It's best, what I do is I peel a little bit of the gasket on the top off at a time, go all the way around, peel a little bit more, peel a little bit more, shave it all down until I get to the thinnest of the gasket. Then I can take my razor blade and start kind of cleaning it off. You're not going to get it perfect, but what I like to do is get a Dremel and get the brass bristle flat brushes, about that big around, and then I will go around my gasket seal, since it's brass brush, and it will smooth things out and not mar up the seating. And so that's what I like to do. Be careful with that because it does throw bristles out. So make sure you got everything covered up good. Of course, it is brass. It's not going to hurt anything. And so that's just a little trick that I like to use to make sure I get everything off that needs to get off. There's no high levels, high spots, and it all seats well. Now, there are gaskets, little O-rings that go around these insets, these dowels here. And when your head goes on, they set in here, and this also oils. On the new gaskets, the James gasket, I don't know about the Cosmetics, but they don't require these O-rings to be back in here. So if you leave the O-rings on or put new O-rings on, because you say, well, I took O-rings off, I'm going to put them back on, and then you put the new head gasket on, you're going to have issues. It's going to fail. In the James kit, it will have a little piece of paper that'll tell you to remove these O-rings and do not place new O-rings back, because the new gaskets are made to work without those O-rings. And I think that's a better seal. In my opinion, you don't have to worry about that O-ring failing. So just keep that in mind. We've got our cylinders honed. We've got them clean. We've got them placed. I did put it in 5th gear. I rotated the motor, holding down. Everything moves nice and free. There's no catches. There's no snags. Everything's sealed up good and looking great. So now let's move to the heads and start working those and cleaning those up. Now for the heads, these are marked front and rear, so really don't have to worry about getting them mixed up. I like to start on the bottom with this residue that's left over from the head gasket. So I take a new flat razor at an angle. I make sure I put pressure on both sides. I go back and forth, and you'll feel when it starts getting smooth. You'll feel that. Now you'll still see some residue, but you'll feel it's smooth, especially compared to the rest. That's all you want. That little brass wheel that I'm about to show you, it'll take off the rest of the little imperfections. So you just take your time. As long as you keep the razor blade at a correct angle, and I use my thumbs, kind of like you ever sharpen a pocket knife on a wet rock, and you kind of use your thumb as a guide to get the angle correct. If you'll do that with your 2 thumbs on this, you'll never have to worry about gouging any of the metal. And then of course, once you get pretty good at it, you kind of know the angle, and you can work it back like that. Again, nice and smooth. These are the torque cones for the exhaust. We'll talk about those here in a minute. Now all this is just carbon buildup. Your gasket does not go here, so you don't have to worry about too much. We'll take that off with some Scotch-Brite pad, WD-40. Also, I did test these valves. They are good, they're sealed, and it's quite clean for the miles that the bike had. Not a lot of carbon buildup. I just did a twin cam not long ago, and buddy, it was built up. So these look actually really good, but I still tested the seals just to make sure, or the guides, or the valves, just to make sure they were sealing up good, and they were. Wonder what John Wick is doing today. Probably running from somebody. Him and his dog. All right, and just like that, we're back to where we began. Nice and smooth. Now I won't stop there. What I will do is I will get my Dremel that's already plugged up. And this is the brass brush that I was talking to you about. When it first started its life here, it was that color. This is a different shape, of course. And these will throw bristles out, and they go right towards your eye. They're magnetized towards your eye. So always wear protection. I've got an extension here, so I don't have to hold this. It gives me a little bit better movement. And I'll take this and just Boy, you talk about smooth as a baby's bottom. It sure is. My eyes kind of see a little bit right here, but I think that's down inside. No? Had a little bit there, didn't we? So let's go around it again. There we go. Oh yeah. Nice and smooth there. Very good. Now if you get some little lines in here where your razor blade was, they're not necessarily cuts, but let's go ahead with that wire brush again and we can take those right out. Now look how nice that is. And that is good, flat. Now that is the hardest part of the head gasket. We have these exhaust seals, and they come with new ones. I don't really like the ones the James Company packs. These are real thin, and they do fit in there, they sit in there, but I like the ones that Harley provide that are real thick. They're kind of cone, they smash in. To me, it just kind of gives a better seal. So you might want to think about changing these out. But however, he's got these torque converter cones that will sit behind here. There to help with aftermarket pipes to kind of stop the backfiring and stuff. So that'll go in there with that, and that'll sit in there. Of course, we've got to pull the old one out as well. Now, this will come out if you got a seal puller, really, or just a flathead screwdriver in there and pop it out. So everything here looks good. We'll put a clean rag down. Of course, we'll clean everything up again. Now here on the top, where the rocker assembly goes, you're not going to get a lot of gasket material left. So what I do is I just wipe this down. I don't even razor blade this or scrape this. I'll take this brass wheel and just let it do the work for me. And just like that, it is done nice and smooth. Of course, we'll put some carb cleaner on her and wipe it down. Got a little thing right there. Right there, okay. There we go. Again, this isn't under tons of pressure on top. This just keeps the oil from leaking out. Now, something that people often forget when they're rebuilding these heads, they forget this right here. That's where this right here, and I've even got a smaller one, comes in real handy. You can just zip down on that. That'll clean the surface. And look at that. You definitely want to get it in on that as well. Now, if you're worried about the crinkle paint on your heads and on your jugs, you can always tape this off. But these, as you can see, they've had some wear on them. So when you're done, your brush will probably look something like that, and that's when you know you've done a good job. Now, I did opt to go with a little bit smaller brass coned brush to get in there so that we don't really take any of this crinkle paint, I guess you could say, off. And look at what a difference that makes. Now, when your head bolts go in, of course we'll clean these up as well and we'll oil them, but they'll have a nice, firm, even seating on that. So definitely good to do. And you can also do your spark plug over there. Alright, so all those are done. And then we'll go ahead and get our exhaust gaskets out and put our new ones in. There we go. This head was running a little lean. This is the front. Well, leaner than the rear, I suppose. There we go. We're going to spray these off, blow them out, make sure we get any kind of debris and just junk out. We'll put our gaskets on, and then we will clean these bolts up and oil them. Now on the torque sequence, the James gasket, since these are MLS heads, multi-layer seals, we are going to use their torque method, which is going to be different than the manual that Harley provides. So there's no longer a couple of torque specs and then you mark the bolt head and mark the head itself and then you go the 90 degrees. There's none of that anymore. It's just a sequence of torquing all the way up to about 40 foot-pounds. So let's get these head bolts cleaned up next. I'll show you a little quick trick on that, and then we can set the heads on and start torquing them down. Now on these head nuts, they are called nuts because they thread onto the studs. Kind of weird because they look like bolts. I will not grab here. You do not want to mess these 12-point up because you're going to be torquing, not a crazy torque, but you just don't want to mess those up. So I'm going to clamp it down here, not super tight. And I'm going to do that so that I can clean up the outer of this. And I'm going to do that with a big brass wheel. You do not want to use this on your heads or anything like that, but I use this to clean up the stuff that just really doesn't matter if they get a little scarred up. Put your peepers on and let's get to it. Oh man, look at the difference in that. That definitely needed some loving. Now, if you're really picky, you can get right up in the corners there with a smaller brass one here, which I might do. And of course, if you want to pretty up the short ones, you can. But, however, the short ones are the only ones that's going to be seen. These long ones will not. They go down inside the head, and then they're covered by the rocker assembly. So we can go ahead and clean that up if we want to a little bit. Again, remember when you're using any kind of brush or fast RPM tools, let them do the work. Don't press, just let them touch it and do the work. You sure don't want to round these off. All right, so we want to oil these bolts up. So I will take a punch. I'll take the box that gasket come in. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll take anything kind of sharp, just to give me a little bit bigger hole. So thank you, James Gaskets, for putting all your stuff in boxes and not just plastic. Now we can fill these with oil and we don't have to worry about oil getting all over the place. Now if I can get this blessed thing to start working. It's full of oil. It just only pumps when it wants to pump. Now what's the purpose of these? To oil these up. Well, what you want is really a perfect torque. A really good seal. And so this oil will provide that. Now, we don't leave the oil in here. We will blow the oil out because you just want a thin residue of it. But now we can let those set and we can go put our heads on. All right, back to our heads. These are all cleaned up. And now we will just put our head gaskets on accordingly. These are multi-layered gaskets, so they're not going to set flush until you actually torque them down. Now we'll clean the bottom of our heads up, just like we did the base, the top of the base, and then we will set those in here. So look at how close this gasket now goes to this dowel or this oiler. If you were to use that O-ring, it would get caught underneath or either on top, and it would not seal. So that's why on these type of gaskets, you do not use the O-ring. Here's our rear. Nice and clean. Check for any kind of debris under here, especially on the holes. Make sure that they line up. And now you should be able to just drop your bolts in. We will go ahead now and set the front on at the same time before we run our bolts in. We're letting our bolts soak a little bit. We will carefully set that on. Boy, that went on really good. First shot. Big time, I'm telling you, we're big time now. We'll give our head nuts that actually look like bolts, we'll give them time to soak a little bit. I like to let them soak about 30 minutes. Then we'll go to the air compressor and blow the oil out. Now we won't clean the threads out. We'll just blow the oil out where there's no oil dripping. It's just oil residue on the threads. That helps to get a really good torque, evenly and sealed. You don't use any thread lock on the head bolts or the head nuts. So we'll give them a minute to soak. We'll blow them out and we'll come and drop them in and we'll begin the torquing sequence, which to me is always a fun time. All right, now that our head bolts are blown out, I will take just a little bit of oil, lube the outside and especially the underside there, not a lot. Now these should slide down in. If they don't do that, you've got something wrong. Either your head's not setting on right or your gasket's cattywampus or something like that. So it should just slide right down on there. And we will run these down by hand. If they don't thread in by hand, then your threads are not clean. So you need to re-clean your threads. And they should thread right on. Okay, just touching down. I'm not doing any kind of torque. Go get those fronts. Since we cleaned the seats on these heads where these bolt nuts go down, they set really nice. Now, of course, your longer bolts go in the back. Your shorter bolts go in the front by the spark plug. They do set down quite a bit lower on the head. Now, there is a torquing sequence that we're going to obey that's per the manual of which bolt to tighten at which time. But the torquing sequence, we're going to actually use the James gasket recommended torque for their multi-layer gasket. So the first pass is 9 foot-pounds. Now mine starts at 10, so I start there, and I've never really had an issue with that. So it says to start here. There's our one. There's our two. There's our one. There's our two. This is our three. and our 4. Then our 3 on the rear, and our 4. Now we will go to 15 foot-pounds on our second pass. It says 12 to 15, but we'll go there. Same sequence. We'll keep this same sequence all the way through. All right, now we'll go up to 25, and this is where things start getting a little fun for us. You can kind of, if you do this enough, you'll feel when it's getting close to the torque you want. And you'll feel that multi-layer gasket kind of squish down. So just take your time, go nice and slow, no big jerks. That's what snaps bolts, especially in old bikes. All right, now the last torque is 38 to 42, and I like to split the difference and just do a 40. And this will be the final torque. Oh, sorry, bumping you there. Scoot over, would you? Why you gotta crowd me? I'm nervous. Last one. And we will go back and just check our torques. Oh, yes. It's always a good feeling when nothing snaps and you don't have a lot of free play all of a sudden. Let's just check our torques. Yes. 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 Yep. 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 Yeah, oh yeah. The heads are done and installed. Now, a lot of success is due to all the preparation that you do. Making sure the mating surfaces are good and clean and level and no debris, making sure your gaskets are good quality gaskets, taking your time to oil these bolts, blow them out, clean the surfaces where they're going to set and underneath. That's really key to getting a good quality seal on these. You're dealing with old bikes, especially this. I mean, 94. Everything looks stock inside, so I would say we're the first people to be in it that far. And I don't know, do the math. How old is that? Okay, with the push rods now, don't forget your metal shims. Make sure they're clean. Make sure where they seat is clean. You got your new O-rings. I put a little bit of oil on them just so they don't go in dry. Okay. Do the same for here. There is a flat side and a rounded side if you're particular about these little metal washers. I always put flat side down. Not sure if it really makes a difference. I don't think I've ever seen a Harley leak from these push rods. There are gaskets up in here. And then I put the new gasket on the push rod cover. Let's drop some oil down on those top of those lifters. We'll drop our push rod in. We will make sure that it's seated on that. Now, since we did not mess with the adjustments, we know that they're set right, and we don't have to worry with that. The exhaust the same way. Again, we'll make sure it's seated down in the hole. We've got our new O-ring on here to go up in there. And now we can watch our push rods as we move to make sure they're in the lowest setting before we start assembling this back end. I like to do the back end first because it's the hardest, and I just like to do the hard stuff first and get it over with. We can go ahead and set our fronts in. This is the intake. Make sure it's seated good. And then we did put a new O-ring in the push rod assembly under the spring. So now we can take our exhaust, put it in, and we can make sure it's seated. All right, very good. Now, I did blow through these just to make sure that there wasn't any obstructions in the push rods itself. Just a good habit to get into. Now we can start putting on our rocker assembly on the rear. Of course, we do have to get to the lowest setting, which is off the cam lobe. So we will rotate the tire. There we go. Those are down. You got your exhaust coming up, intake down on this one, but this is the one we're working on here. And now we can start cleaning this top up once we've had our mitts on it and set our gasket on. and start putting the assembly on. So now we're ready to install our rocker box. And here's the new gasket. As compared to the old gasket, this is the stock gasket. It's metal, has a little bit of a coating on it, kind of flimsy. This is the new James gasket. Feels like a little bit better material, not as floppy. I think it's the same width, but just feels better. A better coating, and it's got these rubberized lines and beads that go around all of the holes. I just really like these. So our surface is clean. We'll just set that on there. It's going to slide around. Don't worry about that. Now on a rocker assembly, I have left the rockers in there. I did inspect them. They're fine. I did clean the bottom where this is going to set on the gasket. Now, I did not use a wire brass brush on this because this is chrome plated, and I didn't want that burning through the chrome. So I just took my razor blade and went around there. You'll see a little bit of residue left over, but it's not anything that's going to cause any issues. It's just visual. So I'll put this on there. We will oil these contact points up for the springs and our little pockets for the top of the push rods as well. And now you will have 4 bolts that are primary bolts that hold this on. You will find that they are different lengths. The longer bolts go with the higher setting here, and the shorter bolts go in the back. Now you have to put the shorter bolts in the assembly before you put the assembly on, because you don't have enough clearance here at the top of the frame to get these bolts in later. You do on the fronts, but not on the rear. So it is a juggling act, but go ahead, take your thumbs and push the rocker arms up and kind of balance them as you're going in. Then this will set kind of down. You can take the bottom underneath here and actually grab the gasket and line it up and move it around where you need to. Now once you've got that kind of set on there, you can go to the other side and make sure your gasket holes line up with those bolts that are already in there, and go ahead and start them. Now you can slide your front ones in, and if they don't line up, just kind of wiggle them around a little bit. They should fairly easily line up. And then this bolt barely fits, but it does fit. All right, so we're going to run these down as much by hand as we can. We're going to work according to the manual in a crisscross pattern. It's a 1/2 inch. And the torque spec on this is 15 to 18 foot-pounds. So I'm going to go and split the difference, well, try to, and go to 17. Now I just want to run these till they're seated all the way around, because I need to verify that my push rods are indeed in the sockets. I can take my finger and twist the push rods and they are nice and movable. I also want to visually make sure that my rocker tips are setting on top of the valves. So I'm not torquing yet, I just want this bolt to set down. There. Now I will use a little ratchet and wrench just to get these on the back, just to seat. Not doing any kind of torque yet. Now our lifters are now starting to get compressed. It's important to make sure that those are indeed down on the off the lobe or off any load of the lobe of the push rods before you start tightening these. If not, you can bend these push rods and really mess the lifters up. So the lifters are full with oil, and when the push rod starts to compress it, it's going to tighten that push rod. So you're not going to be able to sit here and spin this, but you should be. So what I like to do, it is a longer process, but it's a safe process. I will hand tighten these down. There will still be a gap here, so we're not seated all the way even yet. But I will let these lifters bleed down until I can move them, and then I will tighten again. And what you're going to find is as this starts bleeding down the lifters, it's going to release tension on the push rods, and your bolts are going to become loose again. So that's why it's important to do it in steps and stages, and to do a cross pattern so you get an even compression as these push rods and lifters are bleeding down. So we're going to give them just about 10 minutes and come back and check. Make sure the tension is off and they're bled down, and then we'll keep tightening. Okay, been about maybe 5 minutes now, and now these push rods spin nice and free, both of them, and you can see some of our bolts are even loose again. So again, we will keep tightening these till they go down till they're seated. We want this rocker assembly to be seated on top of the head. We're not quite there yet, but we're almost. Now they're seated. Now, of course, these are going to be tight. These are very tight. Now this is seated. I did feel it bottom out on all 4 bolts. Now what we will do is wait again, let the lifters bleed out again, and then when we're able to move these again, we'll do our final torque, and then the rocker arms are on. We will, of course, check, see if we have any lash. Now we did not adjust any of these push rods, so we should be fine on that end, and we can keep building up. Okay, so we're back after about another 5 minutes, and as you can see, we can spin that, and we can spin that. Now let's go ahead and torque these down. These are going to be torqued anywhere from 15 to 18. I'm kind of trying to split the difference. I'm going to 17. So we'll put it on here. We'll go in a crisscross pattern. Doesn't matter where you start, as long as you crisscross it. There we go. That's all that it is. Now on the back sides, these 2 bolts and this bolt here, you're not really going to be able to get an adequate torque wrench in unless you go and pick up one of these little, I guess, adapters. I'm not sure what they're called. Very, very handy to have in your tool chest. And we'll put that on. Now remember, we did this one. We'll go do a cross one. All right, we'll come back. We'll do this one. And our last one. We'll recheck our torques. Those are good. We'll check this one. Good. And good. Now it's important, once we've made it that far, now it's important once you have these torqued down, do not rotate this motor. Again, we torqued it down. There's still a little bit too much tension here. So what we can do now is go ahead and start putting our gaskets in, our other 3 smaller bolts here, and get them seated in. And then we can go ahead and build the top of this, finish it off. That'll give these time to go ahead and bleed all the way out that we need them to. And this side will be done. We can rotate the tire to where now these 2 are off any tension, And we can do the same to the front as we just did here to the rear. And we'll put our rubber gasket on here. I do like to put a little bit of oil on my fingers, not much, just so that it doesn't go in dry. We'll get our 3 bolts here. They're cleaned up and ready to go in. These, I believe, are 7/16 or maybe a 3/8. I'm not sure, but by this point they should just thread in very nicely for you. And then I'll go ahead and get those tightened down. All right, these are 7/16. Is that right? Am I telling you right? Yes. Go ahead and run these down. Again, there's no torque spec on these, so I will just kind of snug them. Don't go crazy. You don't want to snap them. Okay. Very good. Now we'll grab our other gasket that goes in here. Now you'll see there's a straight edge and a curved edge. Curved edge, straight edge. So we'll go that way. The kind of hoops, the circles, will go up over this way, and I've got the wrong one. Yep. All right, next we'll put our gasket on. Now as you can see, we've got some little Mickey Mouse ears up here. We've got these flat pieces down here that set in this. But on the head, or the rocker assembly, you've got this curve, and on the other side, straight. So straight side, curved side. So just match those up and line those up. Set it down in the groove. If you've got some gaskets that's been like in a box or wrapped up, you might need to spray some type of sticky lubricant on there just to have them set down, but it looks like these are going to set very well for us. I'll check the other side. Make sure it's seated in the channel. It is. Now we're ready to go on with the second assembly. Now it's got kind of what I call a spacer here. Now it has your Mickey Mouse ears up here that line up that way, and one side has a what I call a butterfly valve, or umbrella valve, some people call them. So I'll just pull the old one out, stick the new one in provided in the kit, pull the tab through just to make sure that the valve stays seated, and we will slide this over and carefully center it down. There we go. Now this is just going to be compressed by your cover. So you're going to have, no, hold on. Yeah. Gosh, dadgummit. So after you do those 3 bolts, you're going to have 2 Allen heads that are going to go right in the back on both sides. Right out on the corner on what I call the Mickey Mouse ears of the head. Again, no torque spec on these. And you might have to use some smaller tools just to get it to where you can fit your ratchet up in there. Now for these you might have to use a little Allen key to get them seated down in there until you can get you a proper ratchet on and get a good ooga booga on it. So I've got several of these little Allens here that I have shaved off, and that allows me to get into really tight spaces as I need to. With our gaskets, we'll do the middle gasket here. See the Mickey Mouse ears up here on top? Goes that way, the 2 flat things down here. Now you'll notice there is a flat side and a kind of curved side, flat side. So just line that up. If you order good quality gaskets like these, they'll usually set right down in the grooves. You won't have to glue them down or do anything crazy. So I'll walk over to the other side just to make sure that side's in the channel, and it is. Then we'll get what I call the spacer, and the spacer has the 2 Mickey Mouse ears, this cut out here, and this will go on. There is a butterfly valve, a umbrella valve that you'll just pop out, pop a new one in. When you put the new one in, just make sure you pull it with some tweezers or pliers so that it catches and seats well. You don't want that coming off and getting caught up in anything. And look, I said that and it's not seated well, so I'm glad I said that. All right, now we'll just set this easily down to hold that seal down. And now we can put our second seal on top of this spacer. Little different design than the one underneath it. Still has the curve, the flat side here, but this has the 2 kind of weird looking cutouts, and you'll see that they go just right on top there. You place them in the channels. Make sure to press to make sure you feel that they're down in the channels, especially in the back here. If they're going to leak, this is where they leak usually, is in the back. So you want to make sure this is especially sitting in the channel in the back before you put the top on. Okay, now we're ready to go in with our top cover. Of course, kind of same Mickey Mouse ears, same cutout here. It's going to go right on top. If you got a good quality set, gasket set, it will come with new washers and these little gaskets that go underneath these on top. I like to go ahead and put them in there so I can work it in there and not have to worry about trying to get those seated in after the fact. So I'll set that one in there. I'll get that one going, and I'll go over there and hand tighten the back two. This is going to be really tight space here to work. That's why having a little shaved cutoff tool is really important to have to work on these. Now remember, if you can't get a tool up in there until you get the bolt kind of down, those bolts, Allen head bolts, are knurled on the ends, and you can actually take a set of pliers, just easily grab and turn, and to get that bolt down to have the clearance to get a shaved wrench in there. It's not going to hurt them at all. You're not monkeying on it or grilling on it. So just take your time, Watch your tops, don't scratch them up if you're worried about them. But this does work rather well. Saves you a lot of frustration as well. Just takes a while. Now all 4 of these bolts are the same length, so you don't have to worry about where they go. Now since we are trying to create a seal, I'll let one kind of get seated down, and then I'll start on the crisscross pattern. I'll visually watch my gasket. Make sure it's still in the channel it needs to be. These aren't very big screws, so they're very big bolts. But you will feel that gasket kind of mash down. And the one that's going to take you 3 ages is this one back here on the rear. Alright, so we'll visually inspect everything. You want to make sure your gaskets aren't squishing out when they're inside there. Everything looks good. Now we'll repeat the same process for the front. Now that we've taken the time to put these together, you can raise this up and look at our push rods. Nice and able to spin, but no up and down lash, so that's perfect. So now we can spin our tire, get these 2 push rods down off any kind of rise on the lobes of the cam, and then start putting that together. All right, so we got that front assembly on. I went ahead and put the carburetor back on, set the choke up, put the tank on, threw some fuel in, hung the exhaust. Now I've not got the exhaust seated up good yet, so might be a little ticky from the exhaust. If you hear that, no worries. What we're looking for is any type of leaks. We're looking for a good solid compression sound on both jugs. Now we are going to choke it, and we're going to run it through a couple of cycles, but I'll do that off camera. Let's see how it sounds. Got the fuel on. We'll pull the choke out. All right. Let's see what we got. We did it. Sounds good. Little ticky from the exhaust. I've not got it compressed up in there yet with those those torque cones in there. So that'll take care of that. They were coming just from the exhaust. No ticking in the motor. Compression sounds great. And so I'll run it through a couple of cycles like this, get the breather on so it's getting the right air mixture in. But congratulations. Thank you so much for hanging out in the shop with me for all these hours. I get quite lonely out here sometimes. So it's good to have company every now and then. So hey, tell your mama now, I said hi.